a vacuum cleaner designer, accidentally predicted the future of military aviation. In 1941, before supersonic flight even existed, before the F-100, before the Mirage, before the SAAB Draken, one man sketched an aircraft so advanced that many people still mistake it for a Cold War jet. The strangest part? Almost everything about it made aerodynamic sense.
To understand why Project LX exists at all, you have to understand the position Sweden found itself in during the early years of the Second World War. The major powers were racing ahead in secret. Germany had already flown the world's first jet aircraft, the Heinkel HE-178, back in 1939. Britain followed in May of 1941 with the Gloucester E-28/39. But these programs were buried under total secrecy, classified developments that neutral countries had no access to whatsoever. Sweden, surrounded on nearly every side by the conflict, couldn't simply buy the world's newest fighter aircraft from anyone. It was cut off from the international arms market and left to defend itself with whatever its own comparatively small aerospace industry could invent from scratch. For a country in that position, incremental improvement wasn't good enough. If Sweden was going to have any hope of matching what other nations were quietly building behind closed doors, it needed to leap over the present entirely and gamble on where aviation was heading next, not where it currently stood. That gamble found its way into the hands of a man who, on paper, had no business designing a warplane at all.
Sixten Sason was born in 1912, trained as an artist, and had briefly served as a pilot with the Swedish Air Force. That combination, an artist's eye paired with genuine cockpit experience, made him almost uniquely suited to imagine what an aircraft could become, unburdened by the conservative assumptions that governed most aeronautical engineers of his era. His career, both before and after Project LX, reads like the resume of several different designers stitched together. He designed the original Hasselblad camera, a device so precisely engineered that it eventually flew to the surface of the moon with NASA. He designed the Electrolux Z70 vacuum cleaner, turning complicated machinery into something simple and human-friendly to use. And he shaped the entire early SAAB automobile lineup, creating a signature streamlined silhouette, sometimes called the Sason curve, that defined the brand's visual identity for decades. Sason wasn't working in isolation from the wider aviation world either. His other wartime aircraft concept, a radical canard-winged fighter known as the J37, was notable enough to be covered in German aviation publications during the war itself, proof that his ideas, however unconventional, were being watched internationally. Project LX, though, was something else entirely. Even its name likely carried a hidden meaning, probably derived from lux, the Latin word for light, a nod to the light-sensitive weapon system Sason imagined the aircraft would eventually carry.
Project LX was envisioned as a twin-jet, rocket-boosted interceptor, designed with a single mission in mind: climbing fast enough and high enough to guarantee a one-hit kill against enemy strategic bombers before they ever reached their target. Reading through the 1941 documentation today, what stands out isn't just the ambition. It's how many individual ideas Sason bundled into a single airframe, decades before any of them became standard practice. The weapons concept was, if anything, even further ahead of its time. Sason imagined large, folding-fin rockets, guided by light-sensitive cells in their nose, homing in on a target years before anything resembling a heat-seeking missile existed in any air force on Earth. He paired that with an optical cockpit display that projected the target onto a screen in front of the pilot, effectively a primitive targeting data link. And he included a pressurized ejection seat with its own dedicated parachute and oxygen supply, at a time when ejection seats of any kind were still a rarity. None of it had been built. All of it had been imagined in remarkable detail by a camera designer with a pencil.
It would be easy to end the story right there. Genius artist predicts the future of jet fighters, decades ahead of schedule. But that would be telling only half of it. Because for every idea Sason got right, there was another that revealed exactly how far his intuition could carry him, and exactly where it ran straight into the hard limits of physics.
Here is the detail that makes Project LX genuinely remarkable, rather than simply an interesting historical curiosity. In his 1941 sketches, Sason drew airflow curling into a rolling vortex along the wing's leading edge, a phenomenon that allows a sharp delta wing to keep generating lift even at steep angles that would cause a conventional wing to stall completely. That phenomenon has a name today. Aerodynamicists call it the leading edge vortex, and it's a foundational principle behind how delta-winged aircraft actually fly. Sason sketched it, correctly, years before SAAB's own aerodynamics department had formally worked out the theory behind it. For an artist with no formal aerodynamics training, drawing that detail accurately wasn't luck. It reflected a genuinely intuitive grasp of how air moves, the same instinct that let him shape a camera body or a car's silhouette so effectively. He could see a shape and sense how it would behave, even without the mathematics to prove it. But intuition, however sharp, has limits, and Project LX ran directly into several of them.
It was something more interesting than that. A brilliant set of instincts, some of them decades ahead of their time, bolted onto a handful of assumptions that only formal aerodynamic testing could have caught. If a story this strange is worth your time, it's probably worth a like, and subscribing means you'll catch the next one too.
The most serious problem was hiding in the aircraft's very shape. The blunt, unswept center section running through the fuselage would have generated a massive buildup of drag as the aircraft approached the speed of sound. The kind of drag wall that could easily have caused severe pitch instability, or simply prevented the aircraft from ever reaching supersonic speed at all. There was a second flaw, arguably more dangerous than the first. Sason's design called for flip-up slats to expose the rocket tubes mid-flight, panels that would rise directly into the airflow at high speed. At supersonic velocities, raising a flat panel into the slipstream like that wouldn't function as a gentle control surface. It would behave more like the aircraft hitting a wall, generating violent turbulence and very likely structural failure at the nose. Sason himself seemed to sense the drag problem with the wing and offered something closer to a hopeful theory than a proven solution, that the vortices peeling off each wingtip might collide along the center line and partially cancel each other out. It's a plausible idea. It's also one that could never have been confirmed without a wind tunnel Sason simply didn't have access to.
And then there was the takeoff itself. Sason's sketches show the aircraft resting on its tail gear, nose pointed sharply upward, closer to a vertical launch stance than a conventional runway departure. It suggests he hadn't fully grasped that an aircraft needs to accelerate in a level attitude first, building enough speed to actually fly before ever rotating into a climb. As drawn, Project LX likely would have struggled simply to get off the ground. Project LX, in other words, wasn't a flawless blueprint smuggled in from the future. It was something more interesting than that. A brilliant set of instincts, some of them decades ahead of their time,
bolted onto a handful of assumptions that only formal aerodynamic testing could have caught.
Project LX never left the drawing board. No prototype was built, no metal was ever cut. And yet, more than a decade later, an unmistakably similar shape appeared in the skies over Sweden. The SAAB J35 Draken, one of the most iconic fighters of the Cold War, was built around a distinctive double delta wing, a steep inner section blended into a shallower outer section. It's the same fundamental geometry Sason had sketched in 1941, more than a decade before the Draken's own design team began their formal work. Engineers call this convergent evolution, when independent designers, working under the same physical constraints, arrive at strikingly similar solutions. Before the Draken itself flew, Sason built a smaller-scale proof-of-concept aircraft nicknamed the Little Dragon, which first flew in 1952. Over roughly 1,000 test flights, the Little Dragon proved that the core geometry Sason had drawn a decade earlier wasn't just visually striking, it was genuinely superior for the interceptor role it was built for. Whether the Draken's designers ever directly saw Sason's sketches remains uncertain. His original drawings sat unpublished in SAAB's archives for decades, only surfacing publicly in the 1990s. But the resemblance is difficult to dismiss as pure coincidence. At the very least, Project LX appears to have planted a conceptual seed inside the design culture of the company that, years later, built one of the most distinctive fighter silhouettes of the entire Cold War.
Project LX was never going to fly, not as Sason drew it. Its center section would have fought the sound barrier rather than slipping through it. Its control surfaces would have torn themselves apart at speed. Its landing gear geometry suggests an aircraft that might never have left the runway in the first place. And yet, buried inside that flawed 1941 sketch was a genuinely correct vision of where fighter aircraft were heading. Delta wings, hybrid propulsion, guided weaponry, ejection seats with dedicated life support, arriving in some cases 2 decades before the rest of the industry caught up. Sixten Sason spent his career designing cameras, vacuum cleaners, and cars, objects meant to be held, not flown. But in 1941, with nothing more than a pencil and an artist's instinct for shape, he sketched the ghost of a fighter jet that Sweden wouldn't actually build for another decade. Some engineers calculate the future. Sason simply seemed to see it. If you enjoyed this one, there's more where it came from. Subscribing means you won't miss the next. See you in the next video.